Before the war had a shape, it had a rhythm. In 1943, Miriam lived in a narrow apartment where the walls smelled faintly of soap and boiled cabbage. The window rattled when trucks passed, and in winter the cold crept in through a crooked frame that no amount of cloth could fully seal. She worked at a small table near the light, repairing coats that belonged to people she would never meet again. Buttons, hems, cuffs worn thin by repetition. She liked the idea that something broken could be made useful without becoming new. Jakob noticed her hands first. He brought bread whenever he could find it, wrapped in old paper, the crust still warm enough to leave a trace on her palms. They ate slowly, carefully, as if chewing too fast might attract attention. Outside, boots echoed on stairwells. Inside, the radio murmured in low voices, always ready to be silenced. They spoke about ordinary things on purpose: weather, fabric, the stubborn door downstairs that never closed properly. The ring came without ceremony. There was no official room, no witnesses worth naming, no music, just a borrowed table, 2 chairs that did not match, and a promise spoken quietly enough to survive the walls. Jakob had no money for something perfect. He traded favors instead, fixed a lock, carried coal, stitched a tear for a thin metal band that already bore a small dent. Miriam turned it in her fingers and smiled. She said flaws meant it had a history. They scratched the date inside themselves, a needle, a slipping hand, a small drop of blood. They laughed at the sting, surprised by how sharp it was. Pain felt manageable then, contained. The fracture did not arrive all at once. It arrived as adjustments. Streets avoided, shops that stopped accepting her work. A new habit Jakob developed of pausing before corners, listening before doors. Conversations shortened, names went unspoken. Objects were hidden, then rehung, then hidden again. Normal life continued, but thinner, like fabric worn too often. The knock came after midnight. Not violent, not rushed, certain. Miriam would later understand that certainty was what changed everything. Jakob squeezed her hand once, not to reassure her, to memorize it. They were given minutes, not enough time to think, only to react. Miriam slipped the ring from her finger and tied it into the corner of her scarf without knowing why. It felt too visible, too alive. Outside, the air smelled of stone and fuel. Snow fell softly, almost politely. Miriam had the strange thought that the weather had made a mistake, that moments like this deserved something louder. They were separated before the word meant anything. A gesture, a direction. Jakob on one side, Miriam on the other. No farewell, only his face, unfinished, already receding. As she was pushed forward, she felt the weight of the ring hidden against her neck. And for the first time, she wondered whether holding on might demand a price she was not yet ready to pay.
The train did not announce itself as a turning point. It arrived as noise first, metal against metal, a sound that erased conversation. Miriam remembered the smell before anything else. Old wood soaked with damp, oil, and the sourness of fear that had nowhere to go. She was pushed forward with others, pressed close enough to feel ribs through coats, breath against her ear, a shoulder digging into her collarbone. Someone dropped a shoe. No one stopped to pick it up. Inside, time lost its edges. The doors closed, the dark thickened. The ring pressed lightly against her throat, where it had slipped inside her scarf, tapping her skin each time the train lurched forward. She tried to keep her breathing slow, counting silently, the way her mother once had during storms. In, out, in, out. The rhythm broke whenever the train screamed around a bend. Hours later, or maybe days, the doors opened again. Cold rushed in, sharper than before. Orders followed, hands pointed, people moved because stopping felt worse. Miriam stepped down and felt snow under her shoes, packed hard, almost polished. Beyond the platform, fences cut the air into sections. Smoke hung low and steady, like a decision already made. The ring felt suddenly heavy. That was when Miriam understood the first irreversible truth. Nothing she carried had the same meaning anymore. Names, dates, promises, they existed, but not here, not in the way they once had. Survival would require a different language. The early days were about learning rules that were never explained, when to look down, when to speak, when silence was safer than compliance. Miriam watched carefully. She copied what worked. She folded herself smaller without disappearing completely. At night, she pressed the ring flat between her palms, not to remember Jakob's face, but to remember herself. A married woman, a seamstress, someone chosen. Hunger sharpened everything. Bread was counted. Soup was memorized by temperature rather than taste. Miriam learned to slow her eating, to make a piece last longer by breaking it, then breaking it again. The ring became part of that calculation. If found, it could cost her everything. If lost, it would cost her something quieter, something harder to explain. She considered trading it. Others had traded worse things for less, a button for a favor for a night of rest. Miriam held the ring and measured its worth against the cold, against exhaustion, against the math of staying alive. The date inside the band scratched at her finger. Proof, promise, wait. The first true fracture was when she saw Jakob's coat. Not Jakob, just the coat, the familiar tear near the pocket, roughly mended with dark thread. It hung on someone else's shoulders, already reshaped by another body. Miriam did not cry. She did not move. She learned something then that would guide her for years. Grief could be delayed. Survival could not. That night, she made a decision she would never be able to undo. She stopped touching the ring. She hid it deeper. Beneath the lining she stitched secretly into her scarf, with thread pulled from her own sleeve. The ring disappeared from her skin, but not from her thoughts. It became something else, less memory, more responsibility. Because if she lived, she would have to decide what the ring meant. And if she didn't, someone else might decide for her.
The camp taught Miriam how to measure time without clocks. Morning arrived with sound before light, a whistle, boots, the thin panic of people waking too fast. She learned to dress without standing fully upright, to keep her movements economical, to conserve warmth the way others conserved hope. Snow became a constant presence, not always falling, but always remembered, packed into corners, clinging to hems, dissolving into mud that never quite dried. Work assigned meaning to bodies. Miriam was moved from one task to another without explanation, carrying, sorting, standing still for long stretches while nothing happened. She learned quickly which work punished weakness and which punished attention. The safest place, she discovered, was often the one that looked most boring. She kept her eyes down and her pace steady. She became forgettable on purpose. The scarf remained with her. She had stitched it carefully during a night when sleep refused to come, fingers numb, thread pulled from a fraying seam. The ring rested inside, flat against her skin, separated from the world by fabric and intention. She did not touch it anymore. Touching led to remembering. Remembering led to mistakes. Instead, she observed. She noticed how women traded knowledge quietly, which guards ignored what, which moments allowed a breath longer than usual. She learned that survival was less about strength than about timing, about choosing when to disappear and when to be seen, about saving energy for the right kind of waiting. The micro-twist came in the form of a question whispered beside her one evening. "Are you married?" Miriam did not answer at first. The question itself felt dangerous. Labels could attract attention, but the woman asking was older, her hands cracked and red, her eyes sharp with a kind of careful kindness. Miriam nodded once, barely. The woman smiled, then shook her head. "Then hide it better," she said. "Not from them, from yourself." That night, Miriam understood something she had not before. Memory could weaken you if you held it the wrong way. Love could become a liability. The ring was not just a reminder of who she had been, it was a promise she might not be able to keep. Winter tightened its grip. Hunger turned constant, a dull ache that never fully left. Soup became thinner, bread smaller. Miriam's body changed shape without asking her permission. She counted ribs. She stopped counting days. The ring remained, silent, unchanged, a perfect circle in a world that had abandoned symmetry. Then came the moment that redefined everything she thought survival meant. During a work detail, a guard's eyes lingered too long on her scarf. She felt it instantly, the shift in air, the attention narrowing. Her heart raced, not with fear, but calculation. If the scarf was searched, the ring would be found. If the ring was found, the past would be exposed. She made a choice in seconds. That night, she loosened the stitching. Not to remove the ring, not to trade it, but to prepare for the possibility that she might have to let it go without hesitation. Survival, she realized, was not about clinging, it was about readiness. As she lay awake, listening to breathing rise and fall around her, one thought settled heavily in her chest. If the ring was discovered tomorrow, she would have to decide whether it was worth her life. And she was no longer certain of the answer. By the third winter, Miriam understood that survival was built from habits so small they almost disappeared. She learned how to stand so the wind passed around her instead of through her, how to sleep with her knees drawn just enough to trap warmth without drawing attention, how to keep her face neutral when her stomach twisted with hunger. These were not instincts she had been born with. They were learned, practiced, refined. The ring remained hidden. It stayed stitched inside the scarf, pressed flat against her collarbone, where it could not slip or clink or betray her. Miriam no longer thought of it as jewelry. It was inventory, a risk, a final resource she prayed never to use. Sometimes she wondered if this was how morality changed, not shattered, but reorganized. The camp shifted constantly, like a system designed to prevent patterns. New rules appeared without warning, old ones vanished. Miriam noticed that those who survived longest were not the strongest or the bravest, but the most adaptable. They learned when to comply fully and when to become invisible. They learned when kindness was dangerous and when it was necessary. The micro-twist arrived disguised as an opportunity. One afternoon, she was pulled from her usual task and assigned to help in a storage area. The work was dull but sheltered, the kind people quietly hoped for. Inside, the air smelled of dust and damp wood. Shelves held items stripped of context, shoes without feet, coats without bodies, objects waiting to be reassigned. Miriam's hands moved automatically. She sorted fabric, folded, counted, and then she saw it, a small pile of personal items set aside, not yet processed. Watches, buttons, a few bent spoons. Among them, a ring, thicker than hers, engraved with initials. For a moment, the room narrowed. Miriam understood something she had avoided until then. Objects did not disappear because they were insignificant. They disappeared because they were collected, stored, reused. Memory was not erased, it was redistributed. That night, she returned to her place with a new calculation forming in her mind. If her ring was found, it would not be destroyed immediately. It would become part of this system, a thing removed from her story and absorbed into another. The thought unsettled her more than loss. It meant erasure without acknowledgement. The moral dilemma crystallized slowly. Keeping the ring was an act of defiance. Letting it go could be an act of strategy. But there was a third option, one that frightened her more than either: trusting someone else. Trust was rare currency, dangerous to spend, but Miriam had noticed a woman who worked near her, younger, quieter, with fingers quick enough to hide things in plain sight. They had exchanged no names, only glances, timing, a shared understanding of when to look away. The secret act came one evening under the pretense of repairing a torn seam. Miriam loosened the scarf just enough to slide the ring free, holding it for the first time in years. It felt smaller than she remembered, lighter. She pressed it into the other woman's palm, closed her fingers around it, and shook her head once. Not yet. Not gone. Just moved. The woman nodded. No questions. No promises. As Miriam retreated into the darkness, her chest felt strangely hollow and strangely free. But as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, another thought took shape. If the ring survived without her, then what exactly was she surviving for?
The absence of the ring changed Miriam more than its presence ever had. At first, she kept reaching for it without realizing, a reflex, a quiet check-in with herself that no longer worked. Her fingers brushed fabric and found nothing. The empty space felt louder than pain. She told herself this was good. Emptiness could not be stolen. Survival settled into a colder logic. Miriam refined her rules. Never be first, never be last. Speak only when spoken to, and then only enough. Save strength for moments that mattered, though the definition of mattered shifted daily. She watched how people disappeared from routines without ceremony, how names evaporated, how absence became ordinary. She trained herself not to ask questions whose answers would weaken her. The micro-twist arrived through kindness. One evening, after a long work detail, she was handed a piece of bread that was not meant for her. It was thicker than usual, heavier. The woman beside her looked away immediately, pretending the exchange had not happened. Miriam understood the message: eat it now, do not save it, do not thank anyone. As she tore the bread, she noticed something embedded in the crust. Thread. Dark, familiar thread, the kind pulled from a sleeve, the kind she herself had used. Her heart stuttered. Inside the bread, wrapped carefully to avoid notice, was the ring. The woman did not look at her. Miriam did not react. She ate the bread slowly, hiding the ring in her palm, then slipped it back into the lining of her scarf later that night. The exchange had been perfectly timed, invisible, risk shared and returned. Trust, briefly, had worked. But trust always carried interest. The next days felt heavier, not because of hunger or cold, but because Miriam now knew something dangerous. Connection was still possible, and connection could be exploited. She became sharper, more cautious. She noticed eyes lingering, whispers changing direction when she passed. The dilemma deepened. Keeping the ring was no longer just about memory. It had become proof of an alliance, however fragile. If either of them was discovered, the other would follow. Miriam understood that survival sometimes meant severing even the threads that held you upright. Then came the inspection. unannounced, rushed, hands searching through belongings, fabric shaken, seams tested. Miriam felt the world narrow to the space between her breath and her scarf. She stood still, face empty, body compliant, mind racing through consequences. The ring was not found, but something else was. The woman who had returned it to her was taken aside, not violently, efficiently, as if correcting an error. Miriam did not look. Looking could mark you. She learned that lesson too late to feel proud of it. That night, Miriam lay awake with the ring pressed against her chest, the weight unbearable now that it carried someone else's risk. She understood the cost clearly for the first time. The ring could survive. She might not. And soon she would have to decide which of them mattered more.
By the time the winter began to loosen its grip, Miriam no longer trusted relief. Thaw meant mud. Mud meant sickness. The ground softened just enough to remind everyone that it could still swallow things whole. Shoes sank. Carts stalled. The smell of rot mixed with smoke, a reminder that survival adapted but never became kind. Rumors moved faster than facts. Whispers passed through work lines, through night breaths shared in darkness. Front lines shifting, camps being emptied, transfers, liberation. Each word carried hope sharp enough to cut. Miriam learned to file rumors away without letting them touch her pulse. Hope, she understood now, had to be rationed like bread. The ring remained. She stopped hiding it from herself. Instead, she confronted it deliberately, once a week, always at night. She traced the edge with a fingernail, counted the scratches. The date inside felt foreign now, like handwriting from another lifetime. The ring no longer represented a future she expected to reach. It represented continuity, evidence that something had existed before this system tried to compress her into nothing. The micro-twist arrived with an order. One morning, Miriam's group was pulled aside and reassigned. Fewer people, longer distance, no explanation. She felt the shift immediately, the way guards paid closer attention, the way mistakes were corrected faster. Transfers meant uncertainty. Uncertainty meant opportunity, but also disappearance. That night, she made her decision. She would not carry the ring through the transfer, not because she had abandoned its meaning, but because she had finally understood it. Objects could survive when people could not. Memory did not require proximity. Sometimes preserving something meant letting it stay behind. Miriam waited for a moment that felt accidental. Near the edge of the compound, where snow still clung stubbornly to the ground, she knelt as if to fix her shoe. Her fingers worked quickly, practiced, unremarkable. She loosened the scarf seam one final time. The ring rested in her palm, colder than she expected. She pressed it into the earth beneath the thinning snow, pushing until her skin met dirt. She covered it carefully, not rushed, not frantic, deliberate. She smoothed the surface until it looked untouched, as if the ground itself had agreed to keep the secret. Then she stood and walked away without looking back. Looking back could fracture resolve. The transfer came the next day. Miriam survived it, barely. She carried no ring, no proof, only the knowledge of where something meaningful had been placed with intention, not fear. Years later, when people asked how she endured, Miriam never mentioned the ring. She spoke about habits, timing, luck. She spoke about learning when to let go. But beneath the snow, beneath seasons and silence, the ring waited, and it would wait far longer than she ever imagined. Miriam left the camp without anything that could be pointed to as proof. No photographs, no documents worth keeping, no objects that could be held up and explained. When the world reopened itself, slowly, Awkwardly, she stepped into it as someone unrecorded, a woman whose past had been reduced to fragments she carried internally. She learned quickly that survival did not come with instructions for what followed. After meant paperwork, questions asked by people who did not know how to listen, dates that refused to line up, forms that demanded clarity where there was only fog. Miriam answered carefully. She learned which truths exhausted others and which ones could pass unnoticed. Silence became useful again, this time for different reasons. She rebuilt her life the way she had once repaired coats, gradually, quietly, with no expectation of recognition. She found work using her hands, because hands remembered even when language failed. She rented small rooms. She learned new streets. She learned how to sleep through the night without bracing for noise. Some habits stayed anyway. She never wasted food. She never threw anything away without checking it first. People asked about family. She said what could be said. She did not say Jakob's name often. Names, she discovered, could become heavy with repetition. Instead, she lived as if memory were a private room she visited only when necessary. The ring, she told herself, was part of that room now, buried, finished. Years passed, then decades. Snow came and went in predictable seasons. Buildings rose where fences had been. Children played in places where silence had once been enforced. Miriam aged into a woman people described as reserved, kind, difficult to know. She married again, briefly. It did not last. She did not explain why. Some promises, once broken by history, refused replacement. The echo arrived without warning. A letter, official paper, careful language, a request. Someone had found something during construction, not valuable, they said, but personal, possibly belonging to someone who had been there. The date mentioned in the letter made Miriam's hands go cold. She folded the paper and unfolded it again. She told herself it was impossible. Too much time, too many winters. Objects did not wait that long. Memory exaggerated. Hope misfired. She prepared herself to be disappointed, to learn that what had survived was never hers to begin with. Still, she traveled. The ground looked different now, cleaned, ordered, marked. The snow was thinner, less dramatic, melting at the edges as if reluctant to stay. A man spoke to her gently, explaining how it had been uncovered, accidentally, beneath packed earth, caught in the blade of a shovel. He placed it in her hand. The ring was smaller than she remembered, thinner, scarred, but unmistakable. The dent, the uneven date. Her breath caught, not with grief, but with recognition. The ring had waited. It had kept its shape while the world had changed around it. The man asked if it was hers. Miriam did not answer immediately, because holding the ring again meant deciding what the past was allowed to become, and she was no longer certain she wanted to know what the final meaning would be.
Miriam stood in the cold longer than necessary, the ring resting in her open palm as if it were deciding something on its own. She did not cry. That surprised the people watching. It surprised her, too. The tears had already been spent, decades earlier, on trains, on lists, on nights when memory refused to sleep. What rose now was quieter, something like alignment, the sense that two timelines had finally acknowledged each other. She did not put the ring back on. Instead, she closed her fingers around it once, firmly, the way she used to check a seam before cutting thread. The ring was no longer a promise waiting to be fulfilled. It was a witness, proof that love had existed, without needing to survive intact to remain real. Miriam declined the offer to keep it hidden away again. She asked for it to be documented, photographed, logged properly, not as an artifact stripped of context, but as a personal object with a story attached. She dictated carefully, stopping when words threatened to harden into something false.
She said it had belonged to a young woman who believed the future was still negotiable. She said it had been buried deliberately. She did not say why. Back home, she placed the copy of the record in a drawer she opened often, not to revisit the past, but to remind herself that disappearance was never total, that intention mattered, that even in systems designed to erase, something small could be placed gently into the ground and wait. When Miriam died, years later, there was no grand ceremony. Just a few people, a quiet room, snow outside the window, falling without urgency. Among her papers, a note was found, written in steady handwriting. It did not explain the ring. It did not name Jacob. It said only this: "What we choose to protect becomes part of the world, even if we do not." The ring remains archived now, labeled, dated, handled with gloves. But its meaning lives elsewhere, in the understanding that survival is not the opposite of loss, that love does not need permanence to be true, and that sometimes the most human act is not holding on, but trusting the ground to remember what we cannot carry forever.